Hey everyone, welcome to the latest edition of Client Horror Stories. And I'm honored today to have as my guest Roger Parent. And I have no idea what story he's going to tell me, but I'm excited to jump in. How are you doing, Roger?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm a pretty good, having a tea, not a whiskey tonight, but you've built up the excitement for the mystery story that we're going to talk about. And I'm sure you've had a lot of crazy clients, anyone that's run a significant client services business like you has. So let's go. What happened to you, Roger?
Yeah. Oh, well, I think this story is interesting because I think it dives a little bit into morality, which is there's some gray area that I want to bounce thoughts off of you with. But
We'll be diving in.
Yeah, for sure. So the story I kind of thought of was, my business partner had a friend. We'll just leave names out of it and whatnot. But a friend that he was looking for a job at possibly a digital position, and guy was miserable. Like at his job, working at a huge agency, absolutely miserable. Had kids, couldn't spend time with his kids. He was working 70, 80 hours a week. Had an interview with us almost in practical tears because he was just, he needed to get out of that lifestyle. And we offer, super flexible lifestyle, but, he came from this big agency and we were like, to be honest, we probably can't afford you, but we can try to get close. And we ended up making this, an offer, and it didn't end up working out because he was just like, I can't take any sort of pay cut. It is what it is. People scale their lives up right to their income levels, especially in America. And
welcome to life in 2021.
Yeah, right. And so the next step was we had a client whose marketing department was fired, and we were doing good work with them.
Hold on. Before we get to the client, let's analyze just what you said for a moment. Knowing nothing other than he's like really, really overwhelmed by the job, that already feels like a little bit of a yellow flag to me, because it, like, if you're really overwhelmed by stuff, I interpret that to mean you're probably doing something wrong. Like, life is overwhelming. You have to make really hard choices, and really like if your boss or your company is doing too much, you have to know to push back and so on. So it's already sounding like he didn't quite have everything together.
Yeah, and I think that was the part of the lesson learned by us. Many lessons learned by us through this process, for sure. But one of the lessons was, that's definitely a flag for someone who has more of an inability to delegate, right? Because they just take on so much of the work, and they can't put that team together, for sure. So yeah, and then on top of that, just sort of goes to speak to that so many people focus just on the base salary number without realizing that their quality of life is just atrocious, and sometimes it's just not worth it sometimes, just chasing every dollar.
Great points. And we're going to get into the next in a second. I just want to observe what's interesting about both of these is these are the sorts of things you only learn with experience. A version of me 15 years younger I would have seen, oh, wow, he's like overworked by his boss. Wow, that's a bad boss. Well, now I say, okay, no, maybe it's a bad boss, maybe not, who knows? But that means he definitely hasn't learned the key skills of delegation and pushing back. So we get better at sensing these yellow flags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your perception changes as you go into different things. I always say that it was like once I had kids, it was like, oh, now I get it. I see other parents going through like a fussy baby, and I'm like, I just feel so bad for them, because I'm like, I've been there. I know how tough that is. Like a baby crying on an airplane or something. It's not annoying. It's like, I'm so sorry that you're going through that, because it's a nightmare. And so it's like it's the same when you go from being an employee to now being an owner and having different perspectives of these things.
Totally.
For sure. So.
Okay. Love it. So that's the context. Then there's this client.
So so this guy is actually part of the client, and that's how it all relates.
I see.
It all relates together. So we had a client who then left fired their marketing team, whatever, and they were looking for help. So we introed this guy to that client and said, "Hey, X guy, think he'd be a good fit. We know he works his butt off. What would you guys be interested in hiring this guy that we had even made an offer for?" And our thought was, we had really big problems with this client where they were really hands off, and that was nice, but we had no access to their back end data. We couldn't lead generation client, and we just couldn't determine like any differentiation between the leads we were driving. So we didn't know if the leads we were driving were great or terrible. And so we're just driving leads at the cheapest cost per lead without an understanding of really their business, and they just wouldn't get us that information. So the thought was, take somebody we know and trust and see if we can get them into that company. And then we can have this awesome working relationship where everybody wins, right? This guy gets a new job, a high paying job. We get scale out of a client and we share in that upside. And the client gets a much better, marketing department and, experience from their marketing team. So, logically it seemed to make sense, right? So
sounds like a win-win-win.
Yeah. And he got the job. And so, he took over the marketing department. We were super excited, and to scale them. And then, within the first couple months, like the promises of, like explosions in budget and all that started flowing in, and those are starting to throw some red flags. Like, are you sure that you've just only been there a month? Are you sure that you can blow up budget from $70K a month to $400K a month, and they're going to be okay with that? And then the back end data started to come in. So now is the first time that we got visibility, and we were super excited because now we understand.
Just to be clear, he started blowing up the budget from 70 to 400 before you started being able to evaluate the quality.
Exactly. And so
in retrospect, that's another red flag.
Yes. So the red flags piled up very quickly.
Very quickly.
And so we got access to the back end data, and we were like, this is amazing. And then we were able to analyze the business on a much deeper level. And so we looked into like the different qualities of leads, where they're dropping off, like brought in an analytics agency to help us with like more advanced analytics now that we had access to things. And then we really started blowing things up. Performance was like really exciting. And then the management style of this person started to come into play, where he had basically his own idea. Yeah, I think you've called it the know-it-all founder, but
the know-it-all founder. Yes, we were recently discussing that.
Yep. Yeah. So that we had everything set up on a target CPA model.
Wait, hold on. Just want to point out, we spoke the other day about the know-it-all founder, but he's not a founder. He's an employee. The know-it-all employee is even worse, because the know-it-all founder, like, it's your baby. You've been there since you birthed it. You know every little thing. It's famously hard for owners to give up. So I kind of understand the know-it-all founder, but the know-it-all employee, it's your job, and you come in and think you know better than other people, where it's their job as well. Like it's a stronger and worse variation.
Yeah, it is. It was terrible. But so then basically he wanted to switch everything over to manual CPC bidding. And we mentioned, because of the way this market is, like, manual CPC is good in certain circumstances. And I don't want to like say that there aren't certain ways or times at which you should use manual CPC. But we were using target CPA, having success, and he wanted to use manual CPC, and having come from another PPC background, another PPC agency, I think had his own way of doing things, basically. And so we pretty passionately said that that's just not the best move. Here's why. But if you really insist, at the end of the day, like, we can try it.
Yeah,
yep. And so he insisted. We ran it. CPAs tripled. The account like literally blew up. And And sure enough, we switched everything back to Target CPA, fixed the account, and things were going good for performance-wise.
Question. So this period where it blew up and then you went back, where he was totally in the wrong, did he admit it? Did he apologize? Dude, you guys were right, or was he one of these people that always had an excuse and actually thought he was right?
He actually admitted it. And that's what makes this story so egregious by the end, is the fact that he did admit it, and then later on, like, almost goes back on that and forces it down our throats anyway.
As predicting what would happen. The reason why I asked is when people mess up, whether they own it or not, is on one level a really minor little detail, but it's the sort of detail I always take out of proportion. Like, everyone messed it up because, humans are humans and humans make mistakes, but whether you own it or not is the sign of the sort of professional that I would like to want to work with.
Yep. Yeah. And I think at that point it was like, okay, he learned his lesson. We thought it'd be better. But then, we thought like, okay, maybe he just needed to learn that lesson. But then all of a sudden, this insane amount of management came in place where he's like, I want Slack access. I want to be, there was like pretty much an hour time limit. Like, if we didn't respond within an hour, he would start following up. And I'm talking like 100 Slack messages a day, like, came into our Slack and just destroyed like everything. And was like just saying like, well, now I'm spending this, now that as we scaled, it was like it turned into this like crazy, like, I need, basically he wanted someone who was like at his beck and call all day.
Right.
And we were like, that's just not how we operate. And look, we have a process that works. We're going to drive your results. We're super responsive. Like, the average response time for an email for us is like 35 minutes, which is insane. And, but so it blew up our Slack. And then we started trying different account leads, like saying like, oh, maybe this person just isn't jiving well with him, and then we ended up cycling through 4 different people over the summer. And
so wait, hold on. Let's go back for 1 second. This is a great story. I'm already excited to see where it goes. Mm-hmm. Let's talk for a moment about him coming in and micromanaging. So so first, it seems like that was a direct result of him having made that mistake. Where is like do you think that's what happens psychologically? I'm trying to model his mind at this point to get into his shoes. So he made this huge mistake. He realized he was wrong, but then said, dude, I need to like really see and know what's happening and follow them at every little detail. Is that what you think was happening?
I think so. And the backstory to that is, I think that leadership at that company was putting him under such incredible pressure that they were essentially telling him, performance is bad, right? Like, you got to get involved. You got to turn this around. Yeah. And so he was under this enormous pressure because of the mistake he made.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
And that we were recovering performance. And I won't expand as to why, but the market was as rich as it was probably ever going to be, like, in history. And so it was like, they felt like they were losing. I think leadership felt like they were losing like this golden opportunity. And so I guess what ended up as we got through the summer, we get to, whatever the fall time. And we start working.
And wait, I interrupted you a moment ago. And how many account leads did you cycle through with him?
4.
Okay. So
including until it got to me, and then I was the one managing it, which is it literally got to me interfacing with him because it got so insane.
Wow.
And I didn't want my staff to deal with that.
I don't even need to say out loud like the huge red flag that is, because at this point you're like painting yourself red.
Yeah, it's so bad. It was so bad. And so, that was kind of like the last ditch effort. It was like, team, let me jump in. I'll be, like, let me see if I can just, gain this guy's trust, because it just seems like no matter what we do, there's just never going to be any winning with this guy. And so in the meantime, he hires 2 PPC people and then mentions how he understands that he needs to let the experts do the work. So we're like, oh, with the arrival of these other people, maybe they'll be more understanding, easygoing, whatever. But he essentially hired 2 more people that do exactly what he do, and it just doubled the amount of micromanagement. And they asked for like 4 different Slack channels, and just like it exponentially increased like what was the problem that was already happening. And during this time, I will say, like, we went to him and said, we need like 3 things. I think it was, we need better landing pages because our quality scores are absolute garbage for the landing page perspective. We're getting 3 out of 10s in a highly competitive market, and every single thing is like click-through rate and ad relevance are great, landing page experience below average on every single ad. And we gave them mock-ups of exactly what we wanted, even though that's like way outside our scope. Told them like exactly the types of pages, the language we wanted to use. Our SEO team reviewed them to try and see if we can get better landing page experience scores by optimizing them per se. Went like all the way down that line to do that. And then the other issue was that the backend data wasn't aligning with what was getting imported into Google Ads. So those are the 2 problems that we can't fix as Digital Position, because we're not your developers. We didn't have access to like their code base to be able to diagnose these things. And so, so those 2 requests got completely ignored. And instead, on a day-to-day basis, it was, can we change the bid on this keyword? Can we pause this ad? We need to move this bid up 20%. We need to, like on every single lever in AdWords, they were going through basically being the PPC managers and then just telling us which changes to make in the account. It was wild.
So in my experience, when people micromanage at that level, that means they want to fire you. So, yes.
And in my opinion, when people micromanage, generally, it's either because I wrote about this at some point, but it's either because they're like afraid, or they don't trust you, or they don't trust anybody, or there's another couple things that I mentioned about like what the root causes of micromanagement are, but it's super toxic no matter what. But yeah, I think at this point it was kind of evident that this person wanted it to be his show, no matter what. And so it seems like basically there was tons of ego there. And so,
right.
Go ahead.
And also he clearly wanted to fire you, but because he couldn't fire you because it's because of you that he got the job. Instead, he made the situation so unbearable for you that it put you in that position.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And then the relationship kind of came to this like peak disaster when at the end of the summer, September, October, whatever, and then at the end of October, getting into like Q4, he goes in and he says on a Friday afternoon, says, guys, I want to import a bunch of conversions to like try something. And it was like Friday at like 7 p.m., like late, and nobody responded. And then like
I'm so scared.
15 minutes later, without telling us, but without us even saying anything or waiting for our feedback, he imports like thousands of duplicate conversions historically and completely destroys the account for months. Like, because you can't undo an import like that.
Right. You can't undo an import.
A manual import. So he manually imported thousands of leads, like that threw off So basically the target CPA bidding now thought there was like double the leads. And so over the weekend, spend blew up. The next next Monday, we came in like, what the heck did you do to the account? And like spend had tripled, and it was just like a complete disaster. And so we spent November and December basically in an emergency situation, trying to recover like tons of hours on our end, just pouring hours into trying to fix this guy's mistake. And at the end of the year, he says to us, shows us a chart of when the CPA got destroyed and us like slowly recovering it, saying, hey guys, I understand now that like that was like how much of an impact that had. Because it was like 2 months of like really denial that like, oh, it's not a big deal. And so
at least he admitted it. At least he admitted it eventually. Better than never admitting it.
Yep. And then at the end of the year, New Year starts, and he just goes dark, like disappears. Still works at the company, and then stops sending us all back end data. And so wild, and it keeps us on.
So I just to be clear, he basically became manic. He went from one extreme of micromanaging to the other extreme of ignoring you.
completely ignoring us, but managing the account. Like basically just like co-managing in silence.
So without communicating, he would just like go in and like pause ads and stuff.
It's so crazy. And then like he might send us a message or a thing from time to time that says like an email saying like, oh, FYI, pause this, did this. And then to make matters even worse.
Before that, one comment. I've known a lot of people that go really dark when they're embarrassed or humiliated by something. So it could be that he was just so embarrassed by his own fuck up that he just couldn't face you again.
Yeah, and so the hard part about this is that he's one of my business partner's friends, right? And so my business partner asked him, can we go to lunch, man? Like, what's going on? And just won't talk to him. Like, and I think that is part of it. Like, he's ashamed, embarrassed, but he also, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know what's going through his head because it's just such a wild situation.
We'll psychoanalyze him at the end of the story, but I'm excited to know what happens next time at the edge of my couch here.
Yeah, I'm almost there. I promise to the end of the story.
I love it.
But so the next step was, spend started being brought down significantly because of the terrible performance, and we basically couldn't manage the account anymore. And then there in our contract, there's basically a legal precedent where if a client starts managing campaigns inside of our account, we bill on total ad spend. So it became clear that this client wanted to get out of their contract. And so what he started doing was building his own campaigns in Google, and then started sending me emails saying, hey, don't bill me for these campaigns, and then shutting off the digital position run campaigns.
Ooh.
As a way to circumvent the contract and basically try not to get billed for their own management of PPC.
Right. So even though in the contract you should have been billed for all the campaigns in the account, including ones he created, he was trying to use social pressure to say, wait, these ones I created from scratch, nothing to do with you, so excluded, as another way to try to fire you.
Yep. And then we found out that an MCC was created, which means that a separate Google Ads account was created.
Ooh, yeah.
Yep. And basically as a way to fire us instead of just firing us, which, we do month-to-month contracts. And if this person had come to me and been like, look, this just isn't working out, let's talk about an exit plan, I would have been super open about it, right? But there's no communication, and just like
all probably wanted it.
And all like micromanagement. So to to treat us like this was like unbelievable, despite our legitimate best efforts by so many people in our company to try and make this work and drive them the best performance possible. And so what ended up happening is, I sent a huge like email out to that person and the leadership saying, look, it appears that client, you no longer value digital position, and completely understand. We think that there have been some huge issues with the relationship, how things have unfolded over the last year, and kind of itemize those a little bit of like, because I want like everyone to know like what happened, and then said, hey, we've decided we have to make some changes to the working relationship going forward. And so we kicked him out of our Slack, and we didn't allow them to circumvent by building their own campaigns, and we just held to our contract. And then we gave them our termination, basically, and said like, these are the termination details, and then silence. And that's it. Like, relationship's ending. Like, wow.
Did they end up like paying the final invoices, or did they go completely dark?
They did pay. Yep. I've had clients that I've had to sue for significant sums of money, but luckily this client actually did pay. So one of the things we moved to as an agency, which is a huge tip for any agency owner out there, is auto billing. Like I was talking to an agency owner who wasn't getting paid for like 60, 90 days. If you give an inch, they will take a mile. So we only offer auto ACH or auto credit card. And we initiate the payments for every client. And it's like, we start at net 15. And then if they negotiate to net 30, it's still a win. And we guarantee our cash flow because it's initiated by us. And that was one of the best decisions I've made, is like not doing like net 30 or net 60 on check initiated by them, because they'll always, we had over 50% of our clients paying late until we changed that. And now nobody does. So that was a huge move for us. So I think that's why they paid, is because we could literally draft it.
By the way, on that, we'll dive into psychoanalysis in a second. I love that tip. I've never done that. A few years ago, I had a problem with similarly people not paying, people are assholes. But what I did is I added a provision to the contract with a 5% monthly fee. And guess what? Every monthly fee, if it's like more than net 30, everyone started paying net 30.
Yeah, we did up the fee too, from like 1.5% to 5%. Doing the same thing. Exactly.
So financial incentives work sometimes. Okay, so before we go and try to understand this guy and what happened from his perspective and what you learned, is there an addendum to the story? Like, did your business partner ever have lunch with him 2 years later and get the backstory or apologize, or just like did this end the relationship?
They haven't talked since. It's just so and it's we've reached out being like, hey, look, we just like we don't want to like burn the bridge. We had to do what was best for the business because of what was going on, but like this is like one of the most crazy things that, and no, nothing happened. But I did want to bring up the morality around, is it okay? Is a question for you. Is it okay for someone in our position to even think about the fact that you got that person the job, right? Like it's like that shouldn't, the moral side of me says that shouldn't even be part of this. This is just that person's just a client, whatever. And then the other part of me says, we got you the job. Like, how could you do this to us? We got you that job. Like, we literally like rescued you from what you were crying to us, like of how upset you were with your job. And we, and then treated us like this. And, I kind of had the same sort of feeling when I've started to donate a lot more to local things. And I donated to like my local gym a bunch of money during COVID to help them stay afloat. And then they turned around and like canceled open gym and basically like raised prices and then made it like so that I was like one of the 4 people who used open gym all the time. I just work out on my own. And then they like just canceled, like they basically restricted everything that I do. And it's hard as somebody who donated not to be like, not to think about that. Right. But the moral side says that's not what you did it for. Right. So I don't know. That's kind of like, want to get your thoughts on like the morality of that.
Well, I have a few things to say. The very first thing that comes to mind when you say that is I remember the line from King Lear about like how sharper than a serpent's tooth is a thankless child. And like I always remember that we do things we don't need to. You donate money to the gym just because you like them and you support them. You get people jobs and like you treat people with respect and help people. And then the thankless child is like so thankless and so ungrateful. This hurts more than the serpent's tooth. Like it hurts more than the physical injury, because it's this emotional pain and the thanklessness is difficult. The Shakespeare guy, he was smart. He had a good line about everything. I think he's going to be big one day. So what's powerful about that is I think far too many human beings are thankless, or we could say it differently. Here's a reframing of that point. As soon as money is involved, even at $1, rational, logical, good people become a little bit crazy. And like money fucks things up, even tiny amounts. So I think like what's happened to gym is like they're freaking out in COVID, and they don't know what to do. They're going crazy. Oh no, we're losing money. So instead of going to their loyalists and asking what they can do and helping craft a win-win plan, they're like, oh my God, raise prices. And it's not that dissimilar, I think, to what happened to this guy. He got a job and he really needs it. And you need that monthly paycheck. And then suddenly, and he's under pressure for performance and like him thanking you, like is the furthest thing from his mind. And it's bad of him. So on the one hand, I blame him. On the other hand, human nature is such so that most human beings, in my cynical attitude, are this sort of thankless child type. So one of the things I personally try to do is I look for clues to try to identify who's more likely to be the thankless child and who's more likely to be the thankful child. So I think an interesting question about him that we probably don't have time to discuss today, but in general would be what would be the clues about him that he would be this that he would be the thankless child with the serpent's tooth type. And in fact I think part of the growing up, maturity, aging, experience, to use the euphemism for aging, is identifying these sorts of clues for who to help and who to not. You want to help the people who will be thankful, and we have to over time figure out the clues. Okay, these types of people are more likely to be thankful. Like they're less likely to be thankful.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's not even, at least for me, it's not like when we got him the job that I personally cared that he turned around and gave us roses and said like, thank you so much, right? It was just that like, it's hard for me to, it becomes harder to swallow being mistreated by somebody that you gave the job to than versus somebody that you didn't give the job to, if that makes sense. So it's
yes, by the way, there's another line of Shakespeare that ties in too. Sorry, I'm in a mood. The end of, I think it's either sonnet 94, 95, or 96, I forget which one, where he goes, lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. In other words, a good flower that became bad smells much, much worse than the weed, which was always bad. Yeah. So something good that turns bad hurts you more than something you always expect. He's a criminal, whatever. He's robbing people. That's what criminals do. But your best friend turns into a criminal. That hurts even more because
yeah, that's a good point.
I just remember this. The last line. It's 94, 95, 96. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds, and that's exactly that point. Maybe the answer is Shakespeare just has the answer to all our problems.
Yeah, and then the thing is it moral or immoral for me to care more about the smell of the lilies versus the weeds, basically, or should I just be like, I planted the lilies and the weeds are there, and like I not let it bother me, right? It's like that's the hard part.
I think it comes down to the fact that your DNA is human DNA. Like I think there's this objective world where one should judge this evil is the same. Like a weed is a weed. Like it smells bad, and that's how you should look at it. But our human soul doesn't judge people that way. Like even if the weed and the festered lily smell just as bad, because of the path dependence that it used to smell so good, you get angrier and unhappier, even if the end result is the same. Like this is your human heart. And I would say the fact that you're even worrying about that or it hurts you so much shows that you do have a heart and that you do care. You're not one of the serpent reptilian overlords.
Yeah, and you definitely don't give to get, right? Like you don't. It's not why you did it. I think there's just like just a good feeling of helping people, right? Like it has nothing to do with expecting anything in return. And so when you do feel slighted because of what you gave, it almost feels like you had some expectation when you gave, and that's what makes it feel weird. But yeah, I get what you mean. To your point, it's like that's just human, right? Like
Exactly.
to feel that way. But yeah, so that was tough.
So you mean a couple of other observations on the situation. I think part of the power of this story is this really shows how traumatic and damaging total communication breakdown. Like the communication breakdown is worse than the PPC problems. So like even if someone is a good or a bad PPC, if you're doing this, he's doing that, communicating, like over communicating, under communicating this, that it's just it's really hard to do anything well. So I think one interesting lesson is, okay, before working with someone, let's figure out their communication style, because that like if they have a healthy communication style, that massively reduces a lot of risks in this universe.
Yeah, and I think what had happened is that communication isn't just about the amount of communication, right? Like you can talk at each other all day long. It's like the meaning behind that communication. And I even say that in my marriage and in like any relationship, I've yet to find like really a problem that doesn't fall within like trust, communication, or an ability to compromise. And like I use those three words because they relate to almost anything. If there's I don't know, trust, communication, and compromising. And so communication is like that ability to talk about the problems openly, right? Like trust is, it's self-explanatory. Being able to trust that person that their heart's in the right place or whatever. And then an ability to compromise is like the humbleness side of that, which is like the ability to give up control and give up that maybe you don't know all the answers and compromise with whatever person is on the opposite side of that relationship. And so I just think with him, it was like the communication was an unhealthy communication as it was, and there was no compromising and no trust, right? Like, so that relationship just, imploded.
All that makes sense. I hadn't thought about those three criteria, but I like it. And I often make a comparison between dating and working together. In fact, the name of my book is beloved by clients, and it's about making clients fall in love with working with you. And throughout the entire book, it's using the dating sort of metaphors as client relations, client management, relationships, sort of techniques. So yeah. So I like that breakdown. Any other step back lessons, or actually, here's a good question. What are things that knowing now what you know that you should have known then? What are things, and being older, wiser, more sophisticated, what are things that you should have done differently? Or let's say when you've seen similar situations with clients since then, where you've acted differently?
Yeah, I think there's been so many changes from what we've done as a result of that experience that when I reflect on that experience, I almost every experience I can say, like, I could have done more to try and make that relationship work. In this specific experience, I don't think that was the case. I just think that, like, that was a losing relationship, and we knew it 3 months into working with that person, probably even earlier, when those other red flags started to come out, as you mentioned. And so I think that some of the big lessons we learned was you can't be afraid to walk away from big clients. And when we decided to walk away, it was like everybody had this big sigh of relief. Everybody was so much more positive. Everyone felt like an aggressiveness and a fire under the butts to grow the business to make up for that revenue. We grew. It didn't matter to us, ended up not mattering at all. It ended up being like this big team bonding experience. I just wish I did it sooner. Like, I just wish that I didn't drag it off for, almost a year of hell, right? And I wish I just, like, cut it when I knew it was bad, right? That was lesson number one.
On that, I agree 100%. A way I have to make that point is anything I do, whether it's company I invest in, a new project of mine, someone I hire, a new client, my favorite outcome is always quick success, and my second favorite outcome, almost as good as quick success, is quick failure, and then third favorite outcome is like a little bit of success, so you can keep on growing. But I always find it useful to think about quick failure being almost as good as quick success, because if it's quick failure, you can be like, dude, this isn't working, end it now before it gets bad. You can move on. So I'm actually always looking for the quick failures.
Yeah, I think that's I say that fail fast and cheap, right? And in that lesson, we failed slow, but that client paid us a lot of money. So I think that was why it was hard to be willing to walk away, right? And it's also different from an ownership perspective, because you're like, okay, from every angle, I always want to protect every one of my teammates. I never want to have to lay anybody off. I always want to have, like, everyone super protected. So before we walked away, we wanted, like, an assurance that nobody would be affected, right? And so that's just you kind of had, like, we went through that hell per se as a way of protecting our staff, but it was in the same vein. I still wish I just walked away and took the risk, because I have no doubt that my team, which is, I believe, second to none, would have rose to that occasion, and they've risen to every occasion prior to that. So it's that was a big lesson learned for sure.
That's one lesson. Next lesson.
I think next lesson is to never choose money over happiness. for me personally, just as, like, a human being, like, I wasn't sleeping well when this was going on. I was super stressed, and I was working tons of extra hours trying to appease this client, and inevitably time with my family suffered, time for my activities suffered. I lost weight. Like, it was just it like affects you, not just, like, mentally, but physically, when you have somebody that's, like, this much of a burden on you. And so I think that, choosing to, like, I think you've actually mentioned to me, and this is something that I really respect about you, is that, like, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, what the hell are you doing?
Totally.
Right. And I hated it. I hated talking to that person. I hated working with that client. They were terrible. What am I doing? And
life's too short.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a lesson number 2.
Can I share some lessons that your story is reinforcing for me? Mm-hmm. So I'd add to your list. Lesson number 3 is never let them micromanage. That, like, as soon as they start micromanaging, push back from the first bit, because micromanaging, when they come into micromanage when there's a bigger problem that they actually don't trust you. So and then coming and micromanaging only makes things worse every single time. So when they try to micromanage, you have to resist it, but simultaneously try to focus on digging and say, okay, like, what's the bigger problem? So, like, that could have been a moment where you like, actually the problem is unsolvable. So that could have been a sign to step down. So I think
that's a good point.
So never let them micromanage. And actually related to that, or is like another way of making that same point, is as soon as the micromanagement demands start piling up, like, it never lessens. It's like, give an inch and they take a mile. Like, there's a reason why these old cliches are still remembered today. That so I think that is that's definitely one lesson. Another lesson is what we said in the beginning, that people who are in disastrous situations, sometimes it's just people who are competent and good happen to be in a bad moment, but much more likely and much more common is like, there's a reason why he's doing so terribly at what he's doing, because he just doesn't understand something about working or professionality or life or relationships. I'm trying to think if I can think of any other lessons. Do you have any other lessons while I replay this story in my head?
I think you did 2 there, so this would be lesson number 5 if I'm not mistaken. So lesson number 5 would be much better vetting and identification of red flags up front.
Yes.
Yep. So that's we instead of just vetting clients for potential in their business, we spent a lot more time now interviewing them as people. And it's like, I've seen time and time again that these like subpar businesses end up exploding because it's like such an amazing relationship that they do everything we need. It's a great collaborative relationship and they end up doing amazing, versus like some amazing, awesome business model with just this terrible person to work with. And it's like, doesn't matter how great the product is if you just can't work with the person. And so I think it used to be like 80% their business focus and 20% their product, them as people. And now we just completely flip-flopped. It's like all about what kind of people are you? Because that's what we want to identify the people we want to work with, not necessarily just.
By the way, I love that's a good one. My personal process is 99% people and 1% everything else.
That's a good point.
So I'm, yes, like all my interviews, but I have a famous or infamous interview style where I can never talk about the substance of whatever I'm interviewing for. It's always to try to like dig into what kind of person, what kind of person they are. Here are 2 other possible lessons. Another lesson: have principles and stick to them. And when I say principles, I don't even mean like on the moral level. It's like, this is how we do AdWords accounts, period, no matter what. You want to scale tomorrow from 70 to 400? Nope. We just scale slowly. Nope. We can't take your account unless we have data. Like, because if we don't have the data, we actually can't do it. Like, say we need A, B, C, D. You don't give me A, B, C, D. Like, go somewhere else. Because I think like when this reminds your great story reminds us that had you insisted on these things that you really, really needed, then so many of these problems would have been avoided. Like, maybe they would have never become a client because they wouldn't give you data access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that's, and not only is that like from a principle level extremely important, but it also makes your business extremely efficient if you can stick to your process. Because we started doing like going back to manual bidding and way outside of our process. And that was like so inefficient and wildly ridiculous.
That's such a good point. That's such, I really like that. That, that it makes you, I'll say it differently. Like, are you in the business of being the expert or being a robot? And like you're hired because you're the expert that knows how to do this. So, and you're hired to solve the problem, like grow the campaign. But as soon as they start treating you like a robot, you're no longer the expert. And the expert says, no, this is how we do it. This is our expert process that we've developed and that works. You want to do it differently? Go find another expert. So, so I think sticking to your guns for the principles of your expert process is a fantastic lesson. Here's another lesson. Scale relationships and for like employees, clients, everyone. Like, hey, huge client, let's start tomorrow. Massive budget, massive things. Like, what if you say, first 3 months we'll do a trial 90 days of what's like working of what it's like working together. Like any company, no matter how big their budget, like they can always start slow. There's always some way. Hey, we'll only manage this part of the account or in this sort of way. And like a 90-day test period goes a long way towards revealing what they are to like to work with or not.
Yeah, what type of fit it is, essentially, right?
What type of fit it is.
Yeah, and you have to find what our ideal client might not be everybody else's ideal client too. So it's like it's so incredibly difficult to find the exact client that suits your process and your personalities and that fit together. It's like if you have two alphas leading a team as partners, they're just going to be constantly butting heads, right? So it's like that's what happens in almost any relationship. So yeah, that's a good point. Interesting about a trial period. I think another one, or I guess if you wanted to expand on that before I move to a life lesson like number 10 or whatever.
No, I thought of one more as going to move to, but I have to put in my contracts like here's a monthly fee for 90 days, and then in 90 days let's have a serious conversation. So like rather than negotiating up front, I negotiate just enough to do the 90 days, and then for that, and then that's a mutual test of what it's like for both of us to work together.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I hope I gave you some value. You can implement some of these ideas.
Yeah, I absolutely will.
So you're about to suggest another one, and I have one more, and then we can wrap up.
All right. So life lesson number 9, whatever it is, whatever number we're on, is we've talked about this ad nauseum in the Slack chat, but how relationships are more important than results. And I think reflecting back, from the moment he came into that company, it was all like budgets and like, we want to change this and we want to change your manual CPC bidding and we want to do this to the account and what changes the account. And I think that, turning that around and getting to know him more as a person and being like, hey, what are you doing this weekend? I hear you're into mountain biking, what type of bike do you have? And just getting to know that person more, not only him, but the leadership of the company, such that we felt really comfortable with everybody so that if we needed to go past him, we could have in a more comfortable way. But just, nobody wants to fire a friend, basically. And I think that if we had tried to become more of his friend, although my business partner was already sort of his friend, but if we had started the relationship more instead of just trying to blow up everything so fast and more on the personal level, I wonder if that trust would have been, different. I mean, I doubt it, but you know what I mean?
So I have 2 more, 10 and 11, and then we'll end it. And lesson 10, building on that, I actually thought you were going to take that last point in a slightly different direction, which is the risk of the gatekeeper. Like when the whole relationship with a big client is through one person, like what happens if you get in a fight with that one person? People fight. Like like human relationships are hard. So he basically will like, so when there's one person managing a relationship on their side, it's always about like you're dependent not on the success or failure of your actual work, but the success or failure of that relationship. So one way to minimize that risk is to build up relationships with the other people, like the people behind him, and so that you're not fully dependent only on that one person and the person's bosses. And it's such a common scenario where you're assigned someone to work with. You just work with a project manager, and then you meet the big client, the CEO, at the first meeting, at the sales pitch, and then you work with the lower level guys. It's like, it makes sense. You can just keep the bigger CEO or the person behind him like in the loop on monthly emails, and like, or you could build into your contract a quarterly meeting with the leadership or a quarterly report for the leadership. And you can do things like that give you formal, structured ways in order to basically mandate that you keep some sort of relationship with the people behind the gatekeeper. So
I like the term gatekeeper too, because that's exactly sort of what it came into.
Yeah. Exactly. Actually, I hadn't thought about this as an explicit, clear principle until I just said it. But I think so. I've kind of done some of that subconsciously, but I think now I'm going to start doing that a bit more consciously. Like I might write it into my contracts. You should too. Mm-hmm. And then the final one, just so we get to 11, because 11 is a special number, is much, much smaller, because most of the lessons are like really big ones that we've shared. This one, I want to go back to something you mentioned in the story that is really minor, but I want to call it out because it's tiny but important, which is when he came into your Slack and demanded response times of under an hour and so on, that people demanding really, really quick response times is like a massively huge red flag. And like anyone is like, can you do this now? It's always like, who the hell do you think you are? Are you my boss? Like when people become super insistent on expecting me or anyone I work with to be at their computers responding quickly. Like I come down so hard on pushing that back from the first one. Like often, in fact, today someone I work with was being like that, so I purposely haven't responded to an email until tomorrow. I'm trying to train them. Sometimes you need to train people.
For sure.
So people trying to mandate fast response times, I come down hard on. I love the fact that you said. In fact, we were talking the other day about the Digital Wizards webpage. I think you should put 35-minute average email response time, huge letters on the front of the Digital Wizards webpage, because that's an incredible statistic. I don't know any PPC firm that is a number like that. So this is a tangent, another piece of advice. But the importance there is the fast response has to come because that's what the person you hire wants to do. They're that excited. They're into the client relationship. They like responding fast. They want to be on top of it. It's like if it's coming from the other side, that's the massive red flag. And I think the question from the client's eyes is, what can the client do? How can they communicate and talk and structure things so that the people on the other side want to respond quickly to them.
Yeah, and just to relate it back to any relationship, it's like a needy girlfriend that needs a new needy boyfriend or girlfriend, I'll say. That's like all over you. It's like the all you want to do is like push them away, right? It's like, get out of here. But you got to have balance and clear expectations of that relationship. And, that's why you do a weekly call or a monthly call that you can sync up about everything and then minimize the communication between them so that you could focus on the account. And yeah, definitely agree that like we did push back pretty hard, but, didn't work in that circumstance. But, we should have just been like, all right, then it's not for us, right? In hindsight.
Okay. This was a great story. I love it. I love the 11 lessons. I even got some ideas for myself. this was fun. Thank you for your time, Roger. And I'm sure we will talk very soon. And everyone watching who made it to the end, I hope you found it as exciting as we did.
Thanks, Morgan.
Okay. Bye.